Hey, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Gordon Report, our monthly report on updates of the state of employment and unemployment and labor markets and future jobs. And I'm back with my co-host, or my host, actually, Ed Gordon. And we got a very, very special guest today, Kevin Hollenbeck, and this should be a great conversation. So for anybody out there who is wondering what the current state of the labor market is, who wonders when this will end or fade away and when there's going to be more people that are applying for their jobs, stay tuned. This is going to be a great conversation.
Well, it's interesting because both of you, the three of us, have been talking about this for the last 20 years. And now it looks like the crisis has really come to a head. And Kevin was the chief economist for the Upjohn Institute for Employment Research. And thank you for being with us today, Dr. Hollenbeck. All right, thank you. And we're going to talk about the state of the U.S. labor economy. We're going to start out with Kevin. What's your overall outlook on the U.S. labor economy for the rest of this decade? Give us your wisdom.
Okay, Ed. Well, as an econometric professor of mine said, forecasting is a very inexact science, especially when you're talking about the future. So I think there are some things that are going to happen in this decade with a very high likelihood. Slowing population growth and an aging of the population. There's going to be medical and healthcare sector is going to be probably the fastest growing sector of the economy. But I also think travel and hospitality and restaurants are going to grow because Americans have gotten used to eating out and demanding those services. Some things that are likely to happen, I don't know if I would say a high degree of likelihood, but I think there's going to be a continued hollowing out of the middle level occupations. We're going to continue to be bifurcated between very high skilled and low skilled workers.
Right.
I think that means there's going to be continued earnings inequality, the haves and the have-nots. I don't believe immigration is going to be the answer. I think there's going to be continued tough sanctions against immigration. I personally am kind of projecting this great reshuffling that's going on is going to slow down and eventually stop as people get to positions that they're going to hold for a longer period of time than they're doing now. And I see a continuation or expansion of the gig economy and remote working. There are a few potential game changers that may happen in this decade. On the negative side, who knows? I mean, the last couple of years have come up with, a war and a pandemic. We can't predict those sort of things, but positive things that might happen over the decade are expansion of electric vehicles, AI, quantum computing, and who knows, we may get to practical nuclear fusion. So if any of those things come around, I think that will be quite positive for the economy.
Yeah, the fusion thing would be truly revolutionary.
Yeah, sure
now,
would.
what about you well know that we've talked endlessly about the skills job disconnect. How do you think this has contributed to the large number of vacant jobs right now?
Well, there's a huge number of vacancies. This is the last report was a little over 11.5 million vacancies. And in May, we had 6 million unemployed workers. What intrigues me is that for the Department of Labor to classify you as unemployed, you have to be actively looking for work. So that means there are 6 million people that have actively looked for a job.
Right.
And even though there's 1.9 vacancies for every unemployed job person, they're not getting these jobs. So what is the disconnect? And it just obviously has to be the fact that there are mismatches out there. There may be some regional, urban, rural, or region of the country mismatches. There might be there is a mismatch between flexibility, desires of workers, and what employers can offer. But then something you and I have talked a lot about, there's obviously a skill mismatch. And, so the question in my mind is, why are those 6 million people not getting jobs? When you look at the anecdotes, the workers are saying that they want better pay and flexibility, and the employers are saying we want experience or education.
Yes.
So what intrigued me a little bit is it's all occupations. In that latest data on vacancies, it turns out that professional and business service occupations had the second highest rate of vacancies,
Yes.
only behind accommodations. So it's clear that there aren't enough skilled job seekers out there to fill the jobs.
But companies still resist to do training of either of entry level or even incumbent worker. And
right.
why is that?
Well, I think that's mainly due to the mantra that business follows, that you only do what's in your core business, and training's not part of the core business, and so that's one department that has been cut.
Mhm.
For a minute, let me back up on what are skills. We talk about this skills mismatch, but
Yes.
the question is, what are those skills? Well, one of the first projects I did when I got to the Upjohn Institute was to run focus groups with employers and ask, what are the skills that it takes to get a job and to move up in a job? And then I did some statistical analysis of all their responses. And it turns out that number one was problem solving. Number two was the old employability, being on time, not being absent. And number three was dealing with diverse customers, both internal and external.
Yes.
So I think that when firms say they want experience or education, they're really sending signals. They think job experience and education signals the fact that you have these very basic job skills.
Mhm.
So, could they train? Certainly, those skills are trainable. And I think some larger firms are in fact providing training.
Yes, they are.
I think smaller firms should be joining the retains that you're pushing, Ed. These sectoral initiatives where firms get together and pool their resources and train workers that way.
Particularly the small businesses, because they don't have the money in most cases to finance their own training programs. But many of them, if they collaborate with their competitors, even if they collaborate cross sectors, they have many of the same needs. And if they do this, they can contribute something to that, as well as then helping to partner with outside educational institutions. Or set up even a training center where they all work together. I've seen that done as well.
Right. A lot of just about every community now is setting up a business park of some sort. And a lot of these business parks will have a training center that these small businesses can be using to provide these very general skills. So I'm convinced that the skills that are in demand are general skills, not necessarily specific to the operation, but rather, problem solving.
I see.
Just anecdote.
I see both things working. Where you're right, they are general skills, and then in certain industries like healthcare, there are very specific skills that are required, or even marketing. There are some very specific skills that are needed that have to be trained. That now about 20 to 25% of companies are training, but they're the bigger companies, not the smaller ones. And it's the smaller, and the other thing, the bigger ones are poaching the knowledge workers from the smaller ones. But now it's reaching a point, there's no one left to poach.
Right.
And that's why the bigger ones are desperate now, and they're finally re-gearing and setting up some training programs.
Well, Ed, there's a lot of people to poach. There's 130 million people, 140 million people working, so they're all poachable.
But the question
and
is,
the companies that are doing it right. I mean,
yeah. But the question is, what is their education, their problem-solving skills, and their specific career skills to fill a job?
Okay.
That's my point.
No, absolutely. Can I go back to a structural issue? I mean, even if we can reskill the people. So going back to talking about a lot of hospitality accommodation jobs, a lot of these, lower paid jobs, even lower skilled jobs. They're not high skilled jobs that are required. There's a structural problem because a lot of those unfilled jobs happen to be in urban areas where it's not affordable for the people to work there, to live there where they have to work. So you have people even at $15 an hour commuting into Manhattan and commuting into LA, into Chicago, into some of these cities. There was somebody interviewed the other day, and he said he's working just to fill up his gas tank so he can go to work. And so there's a structural problem, and then there's this wage problem. So there may be enough bodies, warm people who can fog a mirror, and enough warm bodies to fill all the jobs. But there is a structural problem as well as a structural infrastructure problem, as well as a structural employment problem. Am I correct? I mean, you're more the expert. I'm the armchair economist here. You guys are the official economists. But
no, you're exactly right. When I said geographic mismatch, there's this urban suburban kind of mismatch. The jobs are in urban areas, but as you say, the workers can't afford to live there. So, part of this is housing costs as well.
And the workers who are in Chicago has 46,000 high-end manufacturing jobs empty right now, and yet large numbers of the citizens of Chicago are functionally illiterate, graduating from high school with an 8th grade reading level. All right. And if this continues, those manufacturers will be out of business within this decade. Now, we've talked about this here in Chicago. We have the Chicago Renaissance Manufacturing Council. They're desperately trying to get more manufacturers engaged in training programs of young adults to qualify them for these jobs that we're talking about. And the problem is many of them come in the door and they're reading at a 6th grade level and they can't do it. You talk about problem solving. It takes a certain level of education to think through problems. If you're a concrete operator, there's one solution and that's it. You try it, it fails, that's the end of it. If you have a little bit more education, there may be 2 or 3 and you can try different ones to see which one works. That's a big problem right now across the entire United States. We have a functionally undereducated workforce overall. We have some very well-trained people and educated people, but we have too small a number of our talent supply is too limited. And it's getting worse. As more boomers retire, it's getting worse. And the numbers of young people coming in have about the same level of education that we had coming into the workplace 30, 50 years ago. And that was only a third of us. That's not enough. By 2030, we need 70% of the jobs will require a 12th grade level of reading, math, writing skills. And we only have a third of the workforce that can do that. talk about a mismatch. This is a disaster.
We also have a digital literacy mismatch, and I know sometimes when
Yep.
we talk about functional literacy, digital literacy is included in that as well.
Yeah.
But here's a challenge, Ed. I mean, even for some of these open jobs that don't require don't require high level of digital skills,
Yes.
and maybe they can get away with a basic level of functional literacy. The problem is how do you apply for the job?
Yeah, but
Well, almost all jobs you need to be able to apply on a smartphone. And
but the basic level of functional literacy is 12th grade for most jobs.
There's certain jobs you don't need a 12th grade literacy.
Yeah, but that will be down to
the trades.
That will be down to 25% of all jobs by 2030. And you have huge numbers of techno peasants. If we continue on the same path right now, we will have 53 million adults eligible in the workforce by 2030 who will be so low that they can only apply for these 25% of the jobs. And they will be surplus. They'll be on the street. That's my point. And you think you have riots and trouble right now? Wait till 2030. It's going to be even worse. When I see what's going on the streets of Chicago with a lot of young teenagers who are graduating from high school and they don't have functional literacy and they have a high school diploma and they have no jobs, no future, no hope, what happens? Well, we see what happens now daily in our cities. This is just the beginning. There are other issues involved with family life and morality and disconnect of transportation. But what I'm just saying to you here, we're on a powder keg that's now already beginning to blow up, and it's not pretty. And, I look at how are we going to address this human capital issue? You lost $1 trillion off the GDP, according to the Federal Reserve last year, because we had 8 million vacant jobs. This year, we have 14 million now, as far as we're concerned. Will it be 2 trillion we lose? 3 trillion the following year? If my projections are right by 2030, how much money is it going to be? How much pain does business have to experience before they get the message they need to start training? How much pain?
So, Ed, economists are often called the pessimistic science, but you're kind of putting us to shame here this morning.
Yeah, well, because it's broader. It's a socio-economic problem.
Well, let me say this. I've been a college professor for 30 years, and I was president of my local school board for 8 years. Mm-hmm. I've thought a lot about education, and I think you're exactly right. There is a clear line of causality from education to productivity to economic growth. But perhaps just as important, there's a clear line of causality from education to individual life fulfillment.
Right. We
clearly are not at a level of education achievement that we should be, that we need to be. However, I guess I take a little bit of issue with you when you look at NAEP, the long run trends, the nation's report card. Students are actually doing better today than they were 50 years ago in both math and language arts, although there's been a real drop in the last 10 years. But, I sort of thought, how do we tighten up? How do we improve our educational system? Should we do it from bottom up? Should we set curriculum standards at grade 1 and grade 2 and not pass kids forward? Or should we start top down? Should colleges impose certain requirements on high school? And there are problems with both approaches, and I've come to believe that education is all our problems. When we vote, we should be voting for school board members that are, touting higher achievement. We should be employing, on our job applications. We should be pushing as much education and achievement as possible. Post-secondary institutions should be pushing high schools to do better. And of course, teachers and parents are key as well.
Right, exactly.
Um,
But the trends I see right now is that parents don't want homework for their children. Teachers want to abandon standardized testing. The colleges and universities now are eliminating their skill training centers and putting kids who basically don't have the ability right into college classes so they can get that loan money. Professors are being in colleges and universities, professors are being pressured to pass kids who have failed with D's so they will stay in the system, and the college and universities will still get the tuition money. What I see is a downslide. You can't click for brains. I'm sorry. The technology is wonderful. It can do wonderful things, but it does not, the brains behind the technology. It's HI I'm concerned with. All right. And the human intelligence, human aptitude is much more important than just artificial intelligence, because without the human intelligence, the artificial intelligence isn't going to go too far in terms of the application for productivity and performance. That's one reason why productivity should be doing great. We have more and more powerful computers, and yet productivity isn't doing very well because the people behind it aren't well educated anymore. Some are, but the majority, for the fourth industrial revolution, that's what's driving this. The fourth industrial revolution and this huge tidal wave of unprecedented people retiring. Look at the three of us. 10 years from now, by 2030, will the three of us still be doing this? I doubt it. Well, who's going to replace us? That's a very good question. Are there enough people to replace us? That's the other question.
Do they want to replace us?
All right. And the other issue is the next generation, are they better educated than we are? I'm sorry, they're at about the same level. If you look at the numbers for the NAEP that you mentioned, Hispanics and African Americans have made some progress, but the rest are basically flat to declining. ACT, SAT scores since 1967 have declined. Even though they've been renormed twice, they're still in decline. What does that, what's the problem here? We don't value education? Well, the three of us do. About 30% of parents and families seem to. They push their kids, whether they're rich, poor, or in between. But the next third sort of get it. The bottom third just are not going anywhere. That's not going to sustain this fourth industrial revolution. And people just seem to be ignoring this information. But not just business people, but parents, educators. We need better teachers in our schools. You mentioned that first, why is it in Finland they have tutors in the school with master's degree in tutoring? And if a child is trouble in first grade, they get tutoring right in the school. And everyone gets it. If they're bright, not that bright, every year, so that literally no child falls behind. They do that in Finland. They do that in Singapore. Why don't we do that here? Well, that's not our custom. We're satisfied that a third of kids really are going to make it. Talk to teachers. They say to you, hey, Ed, we're lucky to get a third of these kids at grade level. You're dreaming that we can get more. The parents don't want it. The kids are lazy and they're on their computers and iPhones all day. We can't do anything. Well, so let's pass the buck. And the parents say, well, the teachers aren't that well trained and educated. How many elementary and high school teachers have a degree in math and science? Most don't. So we have, I talked to some people, they went into teaching elementary school math because they were math phobics. And they have a degree in elementary ed and got a certificate in math in order to teach. Well, why teach math in elementary school when I can work for a consulting business and make $150,000 a year with my math degree or become a CPA? Well, this is a systemic collapse. It's not just a business problem, a parent problem, an education problem. We need to update the system for what we need now, what the demand is right now. That's my point. If this were 1973 we'd have plenty of people for the jobs of 1973. Plenty of low skill, pretty well paying jobs for that time period. This is not 1973, guys. This is 2022. And the skill demands are going this way. And the education level of the country is right here. It's not, it's out of whack. And we've written about it, talked about it, encouraged people about it, and no one's listening, or a few people are listening now. Hopefully they're listening to this broadcast.
Kevin, we're almost at the end, but I have a question here, and it fits a little bit into what Ed was talking about. The male participation rate over the last 70 years. I mean, it's a shock where people went, but the male participation rate has just declined. It was a steady trend, and we knew that. So, we used to have almost 9 out of 10 prime age working age men between 25 and 54 had a job, and now it's like 65% or so.
Mm-hmm.
But I saw a statistic the other day from a friend of mine who's also chief economist. And he's now at the Burning Glass Institute, and he posted this, that the Gad Levinan, that he posted the graph that the male participation rate for 25 to 34 year olds has gone from 90% to 55%.
Yeah.
Wow.
So which just blew me away, because we talk about these in generalizations and stereotypes, and yet when you look at that the male participation rate for that prime age of people entering the workforce, whether they're college grads or high school grads, that's that sweet spot between 25 and 35 years old, that male, but that only 55% are actually included. Now, and this is where I'd like your comment on it, of how this is calculated. Is that would be the people looking for jobs, but are they doing gig jobs, and are the gig jobs calculated into that? So is that male population working, but they're just not working in traditional jobs that's recorded by the government?
Yeah, that was my immediate reaction. I wasn't aware of that specific huge decline that you mentioned, but my reaction was sort of gig economy and how are the data measured? Because, in general, if they're working the gig economy or whatever, they may not be counted. I thought that the drop in the male labor force participation was mainly in the 55 to 64 year olds that were taking early retirement. And when you look at the long run trend, they're the ones that seem to definitely be dropping, according to the U.S. Department of Labor.
It's actually the decline in that age group, and even the 65 and older, the percentage of decline is not as sharp as it is in some of the other groups.
Right.
So so I guess it goes back to the question. Maybe Ed, that's another topic. If we can find somebody to come back on, or Kevin, if you want to come back on and talk about that, is that, and this may make it better or worse, but is the way that the statistics that we're relying on, that we already know the unemployment rate's not accurate because it's how they measure it, but are some of these other statistics that we rely on to predict, to forecast where we're going in the future, how reliable are they anymore if there's so many people that are not included in those percentages? So it could either make it exaggerate it and make it worse, or maybe we'll be optimistic and the glass is half full and it's not as bad as we think.
Who knows? There's been quite a bit of research done on how well the government surveys do in terms of counting things, and generally they come across pretty well. But who knows? I mean, with all the stuff coming out now about the recent census and how many people it missed, you kind of wonder how many people are getting missed in these labor market surveys as well.
Yeah.
Well, there's
Kevin,
so many.
How can people get a hold of you if they want to reach out to you?
They can email me my last name at upjohn.org, upjohn.org.
Okay.
I think that's probably the easiest way.
Okay, perfect. Okay, because we may have some people that want to continue the conversation there.
Ed,
Thank
you, Kevin. Thanks, Kevin, for coming on today. We really appreciate it.
No problem.
And we know that we can get a hold of Ed at Imperial Corp, right?
Right. ImperialCorp.com, right.
And we want to thank everybody for listening again to another episode of the Gordon Report. You can go up to ImperialCorp.com and also download the newsletter.
Yes.
Ed's got a monthly newsletter there. And we will be back live next month for the Gordon Report. But so everybody have a really good weekend and stay tuned. We're living in a never normal world, and it's going to keep changing. And hopefully we'll bring you some solutions how to recruit and retain and engage and educate our future workforce. Yep. Thanks very much, everyone. Okay. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for joining us.